Fascinating. So, there was actually some controversy, with your books. Apparently Facebook took you down or took away your ability to market for some time, but then fate smiled on you. Tell me the story briefly and what you think happened.
Yeah, so we were doing advertisements for our books in the lead up to Christmas, and I think it was about 2 days before Christmas, we got a notification that our advertising account was turned off, and that was a final decision on Facebook's part. And we tried to figure out how to reach a human being at the company, which turned out to be really impossible. And so we sort of brought the story to a reporter at Fox Business named Tyler O'Neill, and he was like, this is crazy. How could they, what they deemed us as it was disruptive or low quality, disruptive content or low quality. And so these children's books were disruptive content. And so, the story got published on Fox Business, and it got a lot of play. And congressmen and people who work on the Hill they saw the story on Fox Business, and they contacted Facebook on our behalf, and they said, what's the deal here? And Facebook kind of, even sharks have predators, and Facebook was like, oh, okay, sorry about that. And they turned our account back on, and notably told the members of Congress about a day and a half, or it was about a half a day before we heard. So they told us, and then the next day at noon, Facebook told us. But it's an interesting sort of, people ask me why did they do that? My personal pet theory, because we've never been told why. They never actually said this was what you were in violation of. What I think happened was we were doing these ads for the books on Reagan and Sol and Amy Coney Barrett, and we had a lot of negative comments on them, calling Ronald Reagan a war criminal and a fascist, and Amy Coney Barrett gender traitor. And we think that they also clicked report on our content, and they reported our advertisements to Facebook. And it probably landed on the desk of a very woke pencil pusher at Facebook whose job it is to just field all of these complaints. That's my sort of pet theory as to what happened. And it sort of speaks to, what happens when there's ideological capture of an entire industry. That's what happens when there's ideological capture of the entire tech industry. That controversy put us on the map for a lot of people, and a lot of people wanted to support us, and it taught us a lesson. We decided to shift our business model much more towards subscriptions, so that we wouldn't be dependent upon marketing. So going into the future, we're releasing a new book every month, and so next month will be John Wayne and Alexander Hamilton, Margaret Thatcher, and Winston Churchill will be in the future, and I'm really excited because we've been talking a lot about Winston Churchill in our house. And so with a subscription plan, we don't have to sort of depend on the whims of big tech to market every single book, and so we'll just send a book directly to folks, and they get the first peek, and that's sort of, a lot of people have asked, like, how are you changing the way that you're marketing your books? And it's a lot more towards building a community and getting them directly into people's hands so that this doesn't happen again.
Our team reached out to Facebook, but we did not immediately receive a response.
And, the illustrations of the Thomas Sowell book at the very least are wonderful. I mean, truly wonderful. But I understand you had trouble finding the people to do the illustration here in the US. Yeah, so if you thought that Thomas Sowell was great, wait until you see Alexander Hamilton, because that will just blow you out of the water. But yeah, we offered an enticing bid for illustrating these books, and folks were interested until they heard who they were illustrating. And then when they heard they were illustrating books about Amy Coney Barrett and Ronald Reagan and Thomas Sowell, they were like, I'm actually really busy for the next 6 months and can't illustrate any of those books for you. And what it came down to was they were afraid of being canceled. They were afraid that illustrating conservative books would sort of pigeonhole them and hurt their careers in the long term, and they could be sort of the center of a firestorm of some sort and in sort of the illustrator world. And so we had to go and find illustrators from around the world. And so this incredible Alexander Hamilton illustrator is based in Bulgaria. But we have folks who are working with us from, I think, every continent but Antarctica, because people, Bulgarians don't care, and folks from Brazil who, that's another one of our illustrators. They just want to get paid and they want to do good work, and that's sort of a lesson of Thomas Sowell. Also, you just want to get paid and do good work, and so we don't have any American illustrators as a result, because they were too afraid of getting into the fray of the mob cancel culture.
Although I suspect as they get more prominent, you may get
you may get some interest.
Yeah, we have already.
So, Thomas Sowell, I mean, you've talked a little bit about that. It's him, just starting out in a, very difficult situation at home, quitting school, figuring out he might want to go to school, and then sort of building himself into the intellectual powerhouse that he became. So what about, for example, Amy Coney Barrett? I don't know much about her story. What is the story?
So that's my favorite of our books to talk about, actually. And it was surprising because, we have the 3 books and we had the 3 names, and I was the least excited about Amy Coney Barrett. She's very new on the scene and doesn't have much sort of accomplished-wise under her belt besides, being a justice of the Supreme Court. So, I mean, who am I to say she's not very accomplished? But she hasn't been there very long, is what I'm saying. And so it was funny. We were reading the book the other day with my children, and we watched the video of that. We have a picture in the book of her holding up the blank note card and saying, like, my notes are blank. It's all coming from memory. And so we pulled it up on YouTube and we showed the video to my kids, and in the background you see people wearing masks, and my kids know how the duration of the pandemic, and they were like, wait, is this in the last 2 years? And I said, yeah, she was just nominated, and she's pretty new on the Supreme Court. But the thing that I love about the Amy Coney Barrett book, my oldest daughter is 8 years old, and there's so many books on the market for young girls, and universally the books that are sort of on the market in the last 5 to 10 years are very empowering, which I love. I love that my daughter is told that she can be an entomologist or a NASA scientist and all these things, and that's what boys and girls should be told. But there's something really big missing from all of those books, and it's motherhood. And my daughter is the oldest of 5. And she wants to have a family like her own. She wants to have a big family, and she really wants to be a mom one day. In addition to like the 17 jobs that she wants to be a store owner, an entomologist. I couldn't even list engineer. She's very ambitious, but that ambition is shown in all of the children's books that we read, except for the mom of a big family. And that's something that my daughter wants too. And that's something that we showcased in the book. We really showcased Amy Coney Barrett's motherhood. So for example, she bakes a cake for every single one of her children's birthdays from scratch. And that's a priority in her house. And now like my kids are like, why don't you bake us cakes? I'm like, well, I don't like to. But now Amy Coney Barrett is setting me up. That's the message that my daughter is getting, that you can do amazing things in your career while also being the mother of a big family. And that's not a message that young girls are getting now. And we talk a lot as a society about the birth rate as it stands now. And a lot of people sort of blame it on young women or young men also who don't want to have families. And there is absolutely that component of it. But people want to have their career and then they want to have kids. But when you start having kids when you're 38, you're not going to have 6 kids. It's just a biological fact. But when a girl reads a book, or a boy, honestly, reads a book that you can have 6, 7 kids and also be a Supreme Court justice, that's a really powerful message, and one that girls are not getting now.
No, that's absolutely fascinating. And so you mentioned that the alcoholism of his father is in the Ronald Reagan book. He's actually kind of rescues his father. I don't know this story.
Yeah, I didn't either. I mean, this is one of the things that I love about our books, is that I also learn things. And so his father was drunk and fell asleep in the snow, and Ronnie dragged him out from the snow and saved his life, because he would have died of hypothermia had he just fell asleep drunk outside, which is the thing that happens. And the Ronald Reagan book sort of follows him through his life of, he was a movie star, he was, all of these things. And it's really interesting I think it's a little bit less interesting now that we've had President Donald Trump, because generally the road to presidency as a child, would understand it now. It's like, well, you're a senator and then you're this, but President Trump sort of broke that mold a little bit. But it was fun to sort of talk about the comparisons between President Trump and Ronald Reagan, because we've talked about other presidents, more recent presidents like Barack Obama and George W. Bush, and they had sort of more traditional government roles. And so we've talked about how President Trump did not have a government role before he became president. And then sort of as we're reading the Ronald Reagan book, here's another president who didn't take that traditional route. And so that was sort of a fun conversation that was sparked by the Ronald Reagan book. But the Ronald Reagan book is also just about him as a person. And I think that, when you're exposed to his anti-communism ideas and everything, they're especially powerful when you can see what parts of his life and his personality sort of sparked those passions, and you can sort of see that within the Reagan book, and it also lends itself to conversations about sort of communism more generally, which seems like a kind of hard conversation to have with an 8-year-old, but you can have them.
Well, I can tell you they're very important conversations to have. You know, I remember having them, but I had them for a different reason. My parents escaped from communist Poland in the 70s, and frankly, you know, all the parents that did that sort of thing from Central and Eastern Europe, first of all, actually loved Ronald Reagan kind of like across the board because of his role in ending the Cold War, so to speak. But also, you know, I remember, you know, learning those, I guess, lessons of the realities of that system helped me a lot to see changes in this country and in my home country of Canada and so forth. Very, very valuable. And I think probably almost not taught at all in the mainstream, right? Yeah, no, it's not. And especially, I mean, the conversations about communism in my household have really been spurred on by, you know, the situation in China with everything that's happened with COVID over the last 2 years. There's been a lot of conversations. I'm also just, you know, separately, one of my many passions, I'm passionate about the North Korean human rights situation. And so I went to South Korea several years ago with an organization called Liberty for North Korea. And so they remember mommy left for 11 days and have never let me live it down. And so we talked about sort of communism in North Korea and what that means, and communism in China, and that it's not unique, that, you know, and the role that President Reagan played in ending communism in such a huge part of the country, or part of the world rather. All of these things intertwine. It's like, sort of, to be like a nerdy homeschooler again, it's the science of relations. That's what Charlotte Mason talks about. The goal of an education of a child is so that they form relationships, and everything that they learn has a relationship with something else in their present day, or something else that they read, and everything sort of has to make a connection. And so the Ronald Reagan book was a really wonderful sort of tie-in to the conversation about communism and about China and North Korea and human rights and all of these things. And it can spark a lot of really interesting conversations. And you're saying you're having these conversations, you know, with your kids as young as 8. How old? 8? 8, yeah. I mean, they're very deep thinkers, and they're very passionate young children, and I know where they get it from. But they have a lot of opinions, and they've been really wonderful to spark these conversations with my kids. And you read them over and over. Every time I get a box, you know, because I'm getting lots of boxes of these books to bring to different things. They break them out and they break them in. They read them again and again. Oh, that's wonderful. Well, so for parents that are, for example, aren't homeschooling, whose kids are in the, you know, either the public system or the private school or something like this, I guess these books are a complement. Like, how do they fit into So that's exactly what we wanted to do with these books. I mean, there's a growing number of homeschool families, and a lot of homeschool families have told me that they incorporated them into their lessons. But the thing about homeschooling is that it's not school at home. It's just parents teaching their kids, and homeschooling is just, you're doing that for bigger parts of the day. And so it's our job as parents to sort of teach our kids, and these books are that. And so, you know, one of our sort of taglines with Heroes of Liberty is, you know, taking back our kids for 15 minutes a day at bedtime, and changing the narrative, and growing their minds, and planting these ideas in their minds and their hearts. You know, 15 minutes before bed, which I mean, I think everyone should be reading right before bed. I'm a really, really big proponent of the power of reading out loud. There's a wonderful book called The Read Aloud Handbook by Jim Trelease, and he talks about the science of what happens to a child's brain when they read aloud. It's fascinating. I could talk about that for another hour and a half. Well, I can tell you, you know, my mother read to me aloud a lot. It was one of the things we did, and it's quite memorable to me. So I'm sure there's something to what you're saying. Well, as I said, I love the Thomas Sowell book. That's the only one I've read thus far. I'm looking forward to reading all of them, frankly. Thank you. And just very briefly, like, how can people find them? Yeah, so we're at heroesofliberty.com, and we just started a subscription plan, and we've already sold hundreds of 2-year subscriptions. So I have job security for 2 years. But the hope is, you know, one a month, you know, at least
for the next 2 years, but the subscriptions are definitely a great way to go, and you get the books before anyone else, but you can also buy individual books. We'll have John Wayne available pretty soon, but in the meantime, we'll have Amy Coney Barrett and Ronald Reagan and Thomas Sowell.
Well, Bethany Mandel, it's such a pleasure to have you on.
Yeah, thank you.